story and transition that to talk about the current state of federal affairs. But on the first slide, which is slide 2, I thought it'd be good just in retrospect to go back and look at where Georgia would have been absent of the Transportation Funding Act of 2015. And this is really an apples to apples comparison. In the sort of the smaller bars or the darker green is what funding would have been. What would our FY18 budget have been in the absence of that legislation, which shows us that we would have probably been about $883 million for our budget as compared to $1.99 billion in fiscal year 18. So as we recall, the notion was to try to achieve an additional $1 billion of investment for our transportation infrastructure out of that legislation. And I think it's pretty safe to say when you see these charts that it has achieved its mission. In doing so, though, I will note that the revenue and investment level has somewhat stabilized, so that's good. Stable investment is good. But we are not seeing that upswing that we had seen in the amended 16, 17, and 18. Now that we've sort of got 17, 18, we've sort of reached that plateau. That is good news. I don't want that to seem like bad news. So speaking of the bad news, on the next slide and the next page is let me give you a little bit of the impact of federal funding on this day. As I remind you that the federal funding comes in federal buckets, some 11 major buckets and then sub-programs that tell you where those dollars have to be spent, usually with reference to population, and then specialized programs. Georgia's obligation authority is about $1.3 billion of federal dollars. I remind you that federal dollars are reimbursable dollars. They don't transfer any federal funds to Georgia to our treasury for us to use. We have to spend Georgia's dollars first and get reimbursed. So far this year, we at the federal level, there has been 3 short-term continuing resolutions that has given what I call a little bit of dribs and drabs of money to Georgia. In fact, out of the $1.3 billion that should be available to Georgia this year, we've received about $360 million. So the federal government allows states to pay it forward, if you will, of using state funds to further the federal program, of which the federal program will reimburse the state 80 cents on the dollar, which is normal and customary, when those dollars become available. I'll tell you all this because it has an impact on the fiscal year 18 budget in the fact that we have advanced some $800 million of projects already, construction projects out the door, but only received about $360 million federal, which means we've paid it forward with Georgia dollars. And I think that previous chart is showing you the reality of transportation funding after 2015. If that had not existed, we would not have been able to advance projects today and keep Georgia moving forward. Now, sort of the bad news to that is that we are sort of paid it forward as far as we can with our own state budgets. So we have advanced the federal program or paid it forward as far as we can go now and really need the full year's appropriation for Congress. As we heard earlier today, it sounds like another continuing resolution to February 8th looks likely, which means that we probably won't get any sizable revenue from the Fed, so we'll still be waiting to see what the full federal year's appropriation, when that will happen. So just to put it shortly, we're about $927 million short on the federal side at the moment, the full year's appropriation. So that's sort of the bad news. So the actual closure of federal government really doesn't have as big an impact as these short-term funding resolutions that has happened thus far. Again, Georgia and the rest of the nation would seek that long-term funding commitment for all of federal fiscal year 18. So just again, and I guess on the pie chart on this, I was going to show you is to remind ourselves that we're exactly opposite of where we used to be. We're now, our budget is 60% of the state funds and about 40% federal, where it used to be that we were totally relying on the federal funds, 60%, and state were 40%. So we sort of swap sides. But that 40% of $1.3 billion is very important to advanced projects. Let's transition now to the next slide and really get into the FY18 amended budget recommendation. The budget total on this bar chart, which is a graphic representation of our budget programs that you can find on HB 683, that's page 79, and 80, I believe, there's the next pages. It's sort of a graphic representation of showing you what the state budget looks like, which totals $1.925 billion. And this is an add of $26.7 million over the FY18 base budget. And also, to give you perspective, is it represents about 7.5% of the overall state budget, is this part of transportation funding. So what we have in each of those columns is, in the left column are capital projects, which consist of the budget programs of capital construction, capital maintenance, and local roads admin. And those are exactly what they are. Those are the projects. Those are basically projects or right-of-way or designed to advance a project to construction, whether it be capital maintenance, capital construction, or a local project. So that totals $937 million. And again, by way of comparison, if we went back to that first slide, that is greater, just that one budget category, greater than what our entire budget would have been if the Transportation Funding Act did not exist. That's pretty impressive. We're putting more into capital projects, capital maintenance, and local projects now than our entire budget, state budget was back in what would have been in 2018 if not changed. Just again, perspective. So what I'd like to highlight is the bars in the circles, which is general operations, payments to CERTA, and intermodal. And in those circles, that's really where we're seeing redistributions in an add in the intermodal program in the amended budget year. So if we flip over to the next slide on page 5, you can see what these changes look like. And we recommend reductions in 3 areas. That's in the construction administration budget, department administration at 2.7, and then payment to CERTA at 1.5. So that totals about $6.6 million in reductions in those budget categories, which then move forward. So the payment to CERTA is basically reducing motor fuel in this program as a result of some lower debt, which is always good. We like our CERTA friends who are here with us today, but anytime the state has lower debt, we can repurpose those dollars to do other things. Those $6.6 million of redistributions move into 3 other categories. Data collections, which increased by $1.1 million. And this is to match federal dollars, which become available for contracting for doing data collections of roadway characteristics. That's keeping up with the miles of roads, the conditions of the roads, and federal reporting. Part of the last transportation bill had reporting requirements for transportation asset management. So we're contracting for those, so those dollars help match the federal dollars that are necessary for federal reporting. The next category is $500,000 that goes to planning, again, to match federal funds. Jay Shop is the Director of Planning, and his planning division has federal funding associated to that. So year to year and amended year to amended year, we look at adjusting to be on commensurate with the federal funds that are available for planning studies. And the third category is $5 million, the lion's share of the redistribution to traffic management category. And this is very important because this supports our expansion of our express lane systems, the Northwest Corridor, which opens up this summer up I-75 and 575 in Cobb and Cherokee County. We have to put more heroes out on those, just like we did on I-75. So we have dedicated heroes there. Also, the operations part of that, managing at our traffic management center for people to monitor and manage those corridors. And also part of those dollars are going into additional funding for safety upgrades of traffic signals. Again, deploying the latest technology in our traffic signals across this state. So that's sort of where you see those redistributions coming from and where they're going to. On the next slide, sorry for the picture there, but I wanted to go back and again highlight a little bit of, we've talked about the budget and the situation, but what are we doing to deliver the plan? And if you flip over to the next slide, which is a slide of the state of Georgia, it has two Georgias on it. Mine says slide 7. I wanted to go back and highlight what we showed you back in 2015, or actually January of 2016, when we stood on those Capitol steps and sort of laid out the 10-year plan. And that's this picture on the left. And I know it's, don't worry about trying to count the dots, but I want to show you what we said we were going to do, what we've done, and then what all we've added to it. So back in January of 2016, we had on the map over 160 bridges. We have already bid 133 bridge projects out. On the original roadway forecast, we have bid out 216 roadway projects. We have 21 still to bid. In the original forecast, we had intersection, signal, and safety projects. 90 of them we have already bid to construction, and we have 19 left to do. But the chart on the right, or the state of Georgia on the right, shows you that not only have we done all those projects, we've added 196 more projects to the list to deploy over the next 18 months. So when you see that we bid 133, 216, and 90 projects just of those types, there's a lot of orange cones out there, Mr. Chairman, as you referenced. And on the next page, that translates into actual work type projects. We show you what we plan to do the rest of this year. And then what we have shown in fiscal year 19 is a little bit of tease. Know that we have 19 budget to present later. You can see $1.7 billion that these are construction projects is what we have. Now you can see that 18 is a little larger than what we show in 19. Part of that is to advance one of those major mobility investment projects on I-16 and I-95, which we'll bid this summer down in Chatham County. That project's about a $325 million project that we partner with CERTA on to deliver. We're actually in that procurement now, and that sort of skews the numbers. That's why you see 1.7 versus about 1.37 billion. But again, to give you a taste of what the outcome is, again, getting the transportation improvement out to the public, you can see what we're doing. And again, that does not count right-of-way projects to buying property or design projects. That's just pure construction. The next slide, again, is just a little bit of a recap of 18. Again, remind you that Georgia has 14,668 bridges. One of those things that's very important to us to do is to get those bridges that are posted replaced. This year, with our FY18 budget, we have done 2 design-build bundle, is what we call, that gets 14 bridges across the state replaced to the tune of about $21 million. That's where geographically we bundle 3 or 4 or 5 bridges. In this case, I think there was 6 bridges in one place and 8 bridges in another place that we put out to design build. And that's on top of another about $22 million investment in low impact bridge program, again, where we work with the cities and counties to replace their bridges that are in need. So just again, really trying to make a dent in the deficient bridges in this state. Locally, there's about 1,600 bridges that are posted, and Georgia DOT has about 70, which again, a legal load can't go across. So we're trying to drive those numbers down. And again, with the funding that we have, we're making some pretty good headway in getting those numbers down. The next slide is slide 10, back to the amended 18 budget. This is the general fund portion of the budget recommendation. And you can see that the amended budget totals $25.186 million, with the lion's share of that, well actually 25.186 of that shows up in airport aid, thanks to the governor, and the governor putting that in the budget to bring 11 runways up to at least 5,000 feet and a few over 5,000 feet. And again, such a big add to our airport system. When you get to 5,000 feet, you can accommodate, as I understand, probably about 85% of all corporate jets. When you get a little over maybe 5,500 feet, you probably get the other 95%. So this really helps these 11 airports across the state in Burke County, Colquitt County, Cook County, Macon County, Morgan County, Polk, Seminole, Washington, Wilkes, and Coweta and Newton counties. So those 11 airports certainly stand to gain. So you can see the biggest impact there. The other part of the change to the state general fund portion to intermodal comes in the form of some redistribution for cybersecurity from the admin program of $3,278, a merit system adjustment of $2,800, and $30,700 in adjustments related to DOAS insurance risk premiums and liabilities for workers' comp. Again, just moving the deck chairs around a little bit from one budget program to another to cover intermodal. So I believe next, again, just wanted to again thank you to this committee and to the legislature for the FY18 bonds. We're well underway. The FY18 bridge bonds at $100 million advanced 18 bridges to construction. It also allowed us to purchase property for 8 projects, which total almost $300,000 in property acquisition, and start design for 1 more. So again, these are state-owned bridges. Those others I talked to you about were local-owned bridges, knocking off another 20, 30 bridges there. Here's 18 state-owned bridges that the bond funds are going toward moving forward. The other thanks goes to the rail bonds that came through the legislature. You see them listed here. They are all underway in one form or the other, and except for the Bainbridge, we're finalizing that for that rail spur in Bainbridge, but everything is moving forward with those. And again, we're grateful for those bonds. It does make a difference, especially on the state-owned rail system. Next slide is just again as a reminder to come before you as the committee to let you know where we stand on employment. We're at 3,822 employees. You can see we're hovering there about the same we were as last fiscal year. We're striving to be at about 4,000 employees. These last weeks and month has demonstrated the need for employees in inclement weather that we have when we have all hands on deck covering the winter weather events across this state, or whether they be tornadoes or hurricanes throughout. When it's time for emergency response, we need about that staff. So we're working very hard to try to backfill those jobs and get them there. We also are focused on some of our professional development as well and trying to retain good employees. The good economy certainly has effect on state government, and we've seen some real impacts to some of our people that have that 8 to 10 year experience that are real good production folks. We're trying to work on that and trying to work with some mentoring, trying to do some other things innovatively that would, again, make sure good people can continue on and do what we need to do. And those dedicated employees, again, are just like Carrie Ellery is. I mean, just an example of a dedicated employee, a man who worked all night long and, had a tragic accident on his way back after working all night long in winter weather conditions. So it's all about our employees. It's all about good people that always get it done. So that transitions to the last slide of, again, pardon our progress. Getting a lot of things done. We've done what we can in the federal situation. We'll continue just as soon as federal dollars become available. We have projects that are stood up, ready to go, and we'll be getting those out just as soon as we can. So, Mr. Chairman, that's probably a long overview of the FY18 amended budget. I'll be glad to entertain any questions or comments.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Good job. Great presentation. I had a couple of questions. Coming up this morning, I know last year, in the 18 budget, we funded your request for the new CHAMP program. And that's something, that we didn't have in the rural parts of the state, such as the HERO program up here that's been so great. But coming up this morning, I just wanted you to know about 6 o'clock this morning, about middle part of I-75 below Macon and the Florida line, there was a bad truck accident. And there was a local deputy there, and there was a CHAMP truck right there on the side of the road with the arrows, and I enjoyed seeing that, knowing that we had a part in helping you do that, because I've seen those trucks out and about more than I ever expected to see them, and And so I appreciate y'all doing that.
Well, you're welcome, and I'll tell you, one of the things that was quite a surprise to us is that we're hearing more from local law enforcement saying thank you, more so from citizens,
Sure.
because it provides them a protection of having that arrow board and getting people over while they can work the accident and not worry about themselves as much as either. But it's been a great program. In fact, during the inclement weather that we've had, which was down on the coast as well, South Georgia, Southeast Georgia, and coast, when we had the snow a few weeks ago, we're able to deploy some more of those and increase their frequency to help motorists while they were stranded. The same thing we did here. We actually deployed last week, had them working out on I-20 and I-85 on the west side, had more emphasis there to try to help motorists that run out of gas or maybe have a difficulty as well. So they have been doing a good job for us, and we still have to message to everybody to call 511 if you need some help. Don't change that tire by yourself. Get some help.
Well, you got a lot of signs out there, and it's very helpful when you call that number. If you need traffic updates, it's a nice addition. I'll tell you one other thing I've noticed, and I just want to applaud y'all on, is during the recession, the road mowing had just, y'all were limited to what, 1 or 2 a year?
Correct.
Well, now what are y'all doing now, 3 or 4?
We're doing 4 on the interstates and 3 on all the state routes, and I think one of the bigger things in that too is we have more litter pickup, and so
Yeah.
trying to keep those roadsides looking good.
Well, I can tell you, it was rough for a while when you'd go through Georgia and you'd get to the next state and you'd get to Florida and you'd all of a sudden the landscaping looked a little better and the roads were mowed. Now it's the opposite. I think our roads look as good as anybody's out there in terms of upkeep, and that makes a big difference. Not necessarily the top priority in safety, but when people come through the state and they see trash everywhere and weeds growing everywhere, it's a sign, it's a symbol. So I want to applaud y'all for that. Got entertained questions from the committee. I see. Who's 23? Is that you, Pam?
No.
Paulette. Representative Braddock.
Mr. Chair, is this working?
Are you 22 or 3?
22.
All right.
Is it working? My light's not working here, so can y'all hear me?
Yes, yes,
Okay. Well, I have some rudimentary questions here and kind of some fundamentals, and then some more specific. On the page where it says fiscal year 18 recommended budget, so payments to CERTA 5%. So they're a revenue generator. So why are we sending money out? Because don't they generate their own funding with the tolls?
Yeah, I'm not sure why we're paying those folks.
Well,
No.
I'm just trying to figure out, so does that go in
Yeah.
the overall budget and then
So,
we're
yeah,
appropriating it out?
no, good question, and it makes total sense. So actually, CERTA carries some of our debt. So the lion's share of this goes to debt payments, and also, when you look at that number, the lion's share of it goes there. The other part of it went to GTIB, which is the Georgia Transportation Infrastructure Bank, which then advances and has local governments leverage projects. So that's where most of it goes when you look at that part of it.
Okay,
And-
so
and
I
part of
thought
it's
that the
operation.
tolls satisfied the debt.
Well, the debt load going there is for previous programs,
Okay.
and not the express lanes. So there's we actually leverage some federal debt instruments called Garveys. Again, it's part of, we have to put a state match. You can get a federal loan, if you will, but we still have to put a 20% match with that, and those dollars of paying debt actually works through CERTA's budget.
Well, I guess I'm confused because we stopped the tolls on 400 because I thought we weren't in debt and that the new lanes were gonna be created to generate revenue going forward for the new lane management.
Okay.
So I'm trying to figure out where we
Okay,
got
so,
debt.
yeah, good question. So the debt that we're talking about is from other programs, not toll projects. So CERTA was able to administer debt for the state for GDOT to be able to utilize in the past. So now we're paying off those loans, if you will, and those payments work through CERTA. So we take those dollars, which is pretty much the state match for federal loans, that goes to them that have to pay the debt load. So that has nothing to do with 400 or 85 or 75 South Express. Those were previous from, this is going back, you know, a decade or more. So 2005, I think you said, so.
Bonding capability, kind of like the equivalent of GSFIC on the GO bonds.
Mhm.
They're our bond.
So now to the notion of what express lanes do, and Chris Tomlinson will be up next, and he can talk in a little more detail, but the charge, the road user charge or the fee, along with the dynamically managed toll lanes will go to pay some form of debt back, but it does not cover the debt. So these are not, there's not basically a revenue source out of the express lanes that covers the capital cost in whole. It's a component of that. So that's express lanes operate very differently than if you built another 400 somewhere, what we call a greenfield project that would be a dedicated toll road. So again, being a variable priced based on supply and demand, you generate revenue, but that revenue does not keep pace with the overall capital cost of the projects, generally speaking.
Okay, so we don't generate enough in the toll lanes though then to cover, you still have to tap into the general budget, right?
We use all fund sources, which would be federal fund sources from the Highway Trust Fund and also our motor fuel to do those projects.
Okay, so that was my next question is, so the money that we dedicated from HB 170, I know that takes time to collect. So I was trying to figure out why we're doing bond issuance. Is that just to draw the money down initially and then we're gonna pay it back over time as 170 collects revenue?
No, the bond issuances were from long ago, but going way back. It has nothing to do with Transportation Funding Act. So we're actually still paying for previous projects that had.
So these are bonds that were issued a long time ago?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So
Now-
we're still paying on that?
Yeah. Now
and-
part of the yeah.
You talking about the bridge bond?
Yeah, says, at the top it says fiscal year 18, and yeah, you said you did.
Oh,
So
I'm sorry.
all of them.
Yeah.
Right.
So the
All the bonds.
the FY18 bonds in the presentation are general fund bonds. So that's not a payment to CERTA. That is covered out of the general fund.
Okay, so, but those funds were dedicated from HB 170, right?
No, those are state general funds.
Okay,
So
in
HB
addition-
170 would be excise and fee components.
Okay, so in addition to what we're doing with 170, you're getting state general funds, okay.
That's correct.
So, it would be helpful, like, when we're out of session, if we had like a class on like 101 on the budget aspects, and then to get us up to speed, and then, cause you know, this committee was created last year, but we really didn't, you know, it was like the 11th hour but the other thing is like how to work things through the process. It would be helpful to know. So my next question is specific to my county. So, and I would actually like to see what we've spent. So we've been trying to get Highway 92 in my county and Douglas and part of Cobb, or moving into Cobb for like 30 years. And we've done these studies over and over. We've done the, you know, the plans, and, you know, it's like we keep doing the same things over and over. So I'd like to see what we've spent in a 30-year period on the studies, the environmental studies, the redesign, because we've done it so many times. And we had the Speaker of the House and the State DOT Director living in the district, and we still don't have Highway 92 widened. There's pieces of it that have been approved, but there's a piece in the middle, right through Hiram, that has been held up for some reason, and I get different answers every time I ask. And what we're gonna have is we're gonna have a huge bottleneck going from like 4 or 6 lanes down to 2, and there are 3 bridges there that I hope y'all aren't repairing yet, because we need to, you know, fix them while we're expanding the road. So my question is number one, how can we stay up to speed with what's going on? Because, you know, people ask me about it, and, you know, I'm not always like in the know of what's going on, but a class on how can we like keep those projects moving along. And the other piece is Windy Hill Road. You know, we started buying right away, we started moving on that project, and then it got shelved for some reason, and I still don't know why. But that would be helpful to kind of keep us in the
Okay.
loop and then get us up to speed on, you know, how all this works, where the money's coming from, and then just how to keep a project on track now that we do have the funding. But I
Yes.
would also like to see like numbers on us doing a look back at how much have we spent in the last 30 years on Highway 92 and trying to get it widened.
Okay, certainly, and we'll be glad to go through that, and actually underway, groundbreaking on Wednesday on
Yeah,
a section of
yeah, I'll
92.
be
So all those sections are under development, and they, to your point, they have been for some time, but they're actually gaining ground. A lot of those have right-of-way funds and coming forward now, so they are moving finally. Part of that's been money, quite frankly, it's just money. And again, remember, congressional balancing among your 14 congressional districts comes into play. So things are moving forward now. That's a good example of projects that have been stalled out for a long time that are now gaining traction and beginning to move. So, but we certainly can meet offline and go through that corridors, talk about other projects as well, sort of how the flavors and funding goes. It's very complicated. These little bar charts don't do it justice in how all it flows, but be glad to.
Okay, thank you.
And Representative Rakestraw, I mean, you know, your district engineer, I know in my area, has just been amazing to work with. Y'all got a great team out there, and those are the folks that really know your district, that can sit down with you anytime, I'm sure. So that's great. I think next was Representative Dickerson.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'd like to thank the Commissioner for all the work he's done. I know it's been monumental, and I appreciate it. I wanted to ask about the federal funds. Will that impede any of the projects that you have going on now? Because I know that there's one in my district that I think Mr. Thomason can attest to, and that's Highway 138. I know we're going to have a public hearing on that in a couple of weeks, I believe, and I would love to see that diversion done sooner than later. And I just wanted to know if those federal funds that you talked about will impede any of the projects that you're working on now if we don't get them, and how soon will we get those federal funds?
Right. So I think the short answer for that, for anything that has not, that we haven't what we call authorized, the federal government saying you may move forward, is at jeopardy. I think that will be solved, obviously, with Congress. It's just a matter of what term. So I think that's safe, and I'm glad you asked that question, because I didn't clarify earlier. Any contract that we have in place now, any construction project, any project that we're buying property on, any project that's under design will continue. There is not a stop in work, because those funds, again, at that point is the promise, at the time it is what we call authorized, that promise exists. The money, quote, is in the bank. We have to pay it and get reimbursed, but that's good. So some states work on more of a cash flow basis, so this would actually physically stop work on projects. Georgia is not in that situation. Whenever we enter into a contract, we've got the backing of the contract amount to be able to pay the bill when it comes due. So that is a very good thing. We don't want to be in a situation where you're out, widening the road and have to send people home and tell them to stop. Now, what it does mean, again, is that we have to slow the pace down right now as it is until this full federal fiscal year funding authorization happens, whenever that happens. So we do have to throttle back, and we can't advance other projects because we couldn't pay for them. But anything that's ongoing now, you don't need to worry about. Any projects that's going on in your area, if they're active and you see work going on, they're good to go. They'll continue.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
All right, Representative Laricchia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to say thank you for what you're doing and kind of comment, but we appreciate from north to south, east and west, and Jay Roberts has been a lot of help to us in South Georgia and trying to plan and bring these projects in. But I just want to remind everybody how blessed Georgia is and how gracious and generous the taxpayers have been in understanding the situation we had with our transportation infrastructure. And if you watch the news much at all, you can see that there's a number of other states and even the federal government sort of scrambling right now to try to figure out how to fund transportation. And that's part of why this funding, these continuing resolutions and being able to help states fund transportation is slow. One of the things that we would tell people about the Transportation Funding Act is it would make us less dependent on federal dollars. And some of the projects that we've been able to complete for Georgians was a result of that bill and not being dependent on the federal government. But the other thing I wanted to comment on, because of the timeliness of all of this, is this past week, DOT was working night and day to try to salt and brine the bridges and the roads. But I know in my district a couple of weeks ago, we don't get 3 inches of snow very often in southeast Georgia, but I actually took some pictures of our area DOT workers out all night, and that morning sent them to Jay, sent them to some other friends with DOT. And I just want us to be mindful of how blessed we are as a state, how generous the taxpayers have been, and that we give them every mile of road and infrastructure for the dollar that they pay in a timely manner and under budget, if possible. And just thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you for that.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. I do want to mention, though, the main, well, maybe we do, who, 25, is that you, Colonel? Colonel Hitchens?
Yeah, and I just want to echo some of the similar remarks. You know, number one, about Champ. I have a personal story to tell, because I was coming up here one day, and right after Champ started, and I was driving my wife's car, which has got all kinds of fancy gadgets in there that I sometimes don't understand. And all of a sudden, the big red light went off and started blinking, and the tire pressure in my right rear tire had dropped to 29 pounds. And I said, oh, I can probably make it up here to Soperton. And next thing I knew, it was at 9 pounds. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to change this tire myself. And I've been in the tire changing business all my life. I mean, tractor tires, truck tires. And I stopped and pulled over, and it's a new car. And my God, it's got the most complicated. I had to read the book to even get started on the jack. And believe it or not, there are two sets of lug nuts. One that fits the tire that goes on the car, the regular tire, and a separate one for the balloon that you have to take out. And I was beside myself, and all of a sudden somebody pulled up behind me, and it was a guy with Champ, and he knew all about it. And he had a hydraulic jack, and he just put it under the axle, jacked it up, changed it, and I wrote a letter of appreciation. And a couple of days later, I was at the Welcome Center in Savannah when we talked about Champ, and I gave the personal story on TV of what had happened to me. But during the snow in Savannah, Champ was very active. He followed. I had a constituent call me and tell me what a great job he'd done. It was two ladies. They had a problem with the car. The battery wouldn't start, and it would go about 5 miles and quit. He followed them all the way to the service station, jumped them off about 3 times. And, you know, having worked in state government for 43 years myself, and a large part of it in law enforcement, I know how it can be for women stranded out alongside the road and how dangerous that is sometimes. So, and when you go back to the law enforcement aspect of it, not only are they very appreciative of the directional assistance they get at accident scenes, they're also very appreciative of the fact that you stop and help a lot of people. They take care of a lot of maintenance issues that law enforcement would have to do that takes away from them being able to respond to other things. So it's really a great program. My district's the third fastest growing in the state. I know you know that, the port and all the growth in Effingham and West Chatham, and you guys have been jolly on the spot with, and Mr. Chairman has been with us since the get-go too, and all the construction that's going on to alleviate the traffic jams coming out of the port, and you know, it's such a great economic developer that I was in the Coast Guard for many years. I understand what goes on in the port and how important modal transportation is. If you got congested highways, we used to be like 13th or 14th on the East Coast in number of container shipments. We're now second only to New York and New Jersey. And part of that is because we're able to, we have a, we really have a problem to begin with, in that we're about the only one on the East Coast that when they come to the buoy, they have to come in 25 miles through that Savannah River to get to the port. Most of the others, they just pull right in and they're right there. But they're willing to go that because it's very economically feasible for them, because they get their loads in and out rapidly, and and it's in large part what you've done, repaving on 995, Jimmy DeLoach Parkway, the $325 million project, I-95 and I-16, and I just want to say we're real appreciative. But I travel back and forth from Savannah to Atlanta all the time. I'm up in North Georgia a lot, and I see it everywhere I go. And I don't think in my 49 years of being with the state, I've ever seen DOT do as much. And I know a large part of it is money, and we're thrilled. And most of my constituents, they voted against Splosh when it came up last time, but I don't get anything but positive remarks from the overwhelming majority of them. And it's worth the tax money, they say, for the savings that they have to their cars. And I live adjacent to South Carolina. Nothing against South Carolina, but I ride over to Hilton Head from time to time. You got to get your front end realigned and put new shocks on there about every time you get over there, because I-95 is so beat up from the truck traffic. They've only got 2 lanes on 95. We got 3 in Georgia. We have accidents every time we have a holiday weekend because the traffic backs up there at the Savannah River Bridge. But you all have done a great job, and I think I and all my constituents and people across the state are very pleased.
Well, thank you for that. It's a team effort.
Thank you, Colonel. Representative Estration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Commissioner and Director and the entire DOT team, there's been a lot of praise given today for rural Georgia areas outside of Atlanta, but I just want to thank you for your efforts in the metro area. I'll be very brief. I know it's late in the day, but what immediately comes to mind is sine die from last session, and watching the newscasts of what was going on, and just the concern and desire to see that safety was addressed with the I-85 fire and bridge collapse, and the efforts that DOT made in the following month and a half, as I recall, 45 days, if that, was truly astounding. And the economic impact on the city and the whole state of Georgia at that time was such that efforts were put forward to address that as quickly as possible. So I just wanted to add my appreciation to what's already been said today for that specific project as well as others. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And that's, again, total team effort across the board, across the state, the city, MARTA, everybody. It was a total team effort to have that great accomplishment.
All right, before I let you go, I got one final question in reference to your main ask in the governor's budget with the airport money. I noticed that there's nothing in addition in the 19 budget, but this goes hand in hand, so I applaud the governor for this with everything that's going on with rural development, because that's a big key to the development in those areas. But I'd like to ask if you could ask Carol and Intermodal to just maybe get us a list of some of the other needs that are out there, similar needs where you have the same issue with these runways that aren't long enough to really bring in what would be needed. So thank you all for what you're doing. Thank you for your time, and appreciate you being with us today, and thanks to the committee for your great questions. And so we're going to let you go.
All right. Thank you very much.
And then we're going to call up Director Tomlinson, and now that Gerda and Serta are one happy agency together, combined, maybe that'll speed things up so everybody can get caught in traffic.
Take the bus.
And Commissioner, congratulations on being on the cover of Georgia Trend too. That we're all proud of you. I still haven't gotten an autograph, but Chris, thank you for being with us today.
No problem. My pleasure.
Also, echo everything else we've said. Appreciate everything you're doing.
Thank you so much.
I'm certainly glad I was able to get on that express lane this morning because I was pressed for time, and made a big difference this morning.
Yeah, you know, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the I-75 South Metro Express lanes. It'll be 1 year, January 28th. So, but I'll be happy to touch on that as well.
All right, well, go ahead.
All right. Well, again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's always a pleasure to have an opportunity to come before this committee. You just mentioned to the commissioner about his asks. We're trying to do our part for the state. In the amended budget, we have no asks. If anything, we have a give. But if you take a look at the brief presentation or slides I provided you, I always like to start off by just giving you just a little bit of background about where we are, a tale of the tape in terms of the commuter-facing or citizen-facing operations. Over the past year, we've moved the express operations from underneath Greta and into CERTA. So all of the commuter-facing operations are now housed under SRTA. Express, we run, operate, maintain 27 park and ride lots, and we have 27 routes. Our fleet has 165 coaches, and in FY17, 1.8 million passenger boardings. Again, those park and ride lots are spread across 12 different metro Atlanta counties, but we draw ridership from over 40 counties. So this is a service that a number of people are using and relying on to get to the major employment zones of either downtown, midtown, or the perimeter area. Turning to the side that I think we're more well known for with Peach Pass, every time I come, I probably need to start showing you guys the last presentation so you can see how the program is growing by leaps and bounds. As I sit here today, we have over 400,000 Peach Pass accounts. So again, an account is just a household that has an account in place. On those 400,000 accounts, there's over 673,000 transponders. But really, you could substitute that word for vehicles. That's how many vehicles have an active Peach Pass tag in there. And again, that's not how many we've issued, because people close accounts, they come and go. But there's 673,000 active vehicles, most of which are in the state of Georgia, that have Peach Pass transponders in them today. I mentioned I-75 South coming up on the 1-year anniversary. We're seeing anywhere from about 8,000 to 10,000 trips per day. That's tracking pretty well. It's actually slightly ahead of our projections. And if you remember late last year with the hurricanes with Irma and Marie, the highest one-day total was during one of those events where we had 22,000 vehicles utilizing it. That was primarily with Florida evacuees headed our way to get away from the path of the storms. We worked in conjunction with our partners at DOT. We left that roadway in the northbound direction to help facilitate that traffic. And like I said, we saw 22,000 vehicles in one day during that disaster. Came close to those totals when people finally were able to return. But day in, day out, about 8,000 to 10,000 vehicles per day utilizing that roadway. I-85, which has been open since 2011, we see on average 29,000 trips per day. And we've seen totals as high as 31,000, 32,000 trips per day. So that road continues to see a high utilization. So that's just some background. Picking up on Representative Rakestraw's questions to the commissioner, in addition to those operational aspects, we also serve as a transportation financing arm for the state. And the reason I want to go ahead and point that out, it doesn't have to be with a toll road. In fact, a lot of times, a lot of people aren't aware, and that's purposeful. We're not shying from the limelight, but for example, one of the projects we worked the department with is the financing of the I-285-400 interchange. We want the public to focus on DOT in that work, because when you hear a state road and tollway authority, you tend to think, oh, they must be putting a toll on that. But the reality is, whenever there's going to be any financing outside of either the money that the department has in the bank, or if we're looking at having to issue any type of debt other than general obligation bond debt, then there's a good chance that we'll be working with the department on that. And so the GARVI bonds, these grant anticipation revenue vehicles, GARVIs is just a lot easier to say, or even when we do a low interest loan, such as the TIFIA program from the federal government, where we borrowed $275 million for the Northwest Corridor project. Those are debts that are held in the name of CERTA, or the authority. And those payments, if it's a toll-related project, can come from toll revenue. But in the case of Garvey's, where 80% of it is coming from federal funds that we draw down, we serve as that financing vehicle. So there's a lot of financing, and in the case of the Garvey program, going back historically, around $2 billion worth of financing for projects that had nothing to do with toll roads. These were improvements to highways throughout the state of Georgia. But like the commissioner, I'm always happy offline to provide more information, specific information. But I do like when we get questions, because we do a lot more than just tolls. That being said, if you turn to the next slide, excuse me, on the amended fiscal year governor's recommended budget, again, starting with the Georgia Regional Transportation Authority, there's no change or no ask. What you see listed there, which aligns with your tracking sheet on page 22, are the funds that are already in our FY18 base budget, but you see the zeros. There's no request or change. That money is money that the General Assembly appropriates as part of the base budget each year to go towards the transit program. As I said, we've moved the operations, so we have an intergovernmental agreement between the two authorities where that money is transferred into that transit program. If you look at the second half of the sheet, and now we're talking about the State Road and Tollway Authority, the commissioner actually covered this fairly well in his presentation, but the only change is, this is the give, if you will, but it's a reduction of $1.5 million in the payments to CERTA. And again, those monies would not be coming over from GDOT to CERTA, which were primarily for debt service, but instead of that $1.5 million, $1 million would go towards the data collection, compliance, and reporting program at GDOT to help them gather the statistics and provide the required federal reporting. And then $500,000 goes to planning for programs such as the Express Lanes program and safety and planning, so like the traffic lights that he mentioned. But those are the only items in the governor's recommended budget as it relates to either the authorities that I have the privilege of being executive director over. And with that, I can pause there to see questions on the budget. I do have a last slide that we can come back to, which is just highlighting some key activities that are coming up. And actually, since everyone turned to, I'll just cover them and then I'll just open it up for questions. Okay. You heard mention of the infrastructure bank during the commissioner's presentation. This is a revolving loan and grant program used for transportation projects. Round 6, our latest round, just opened up today, in fact. And again, through this program, community improvement districts, local governments, cities, counties can apply for funding to put towards innovative projects that can help improve economic development, economic activity in their local areas. Again, it's grants and loans. For some reason, people seem to prefer to get a grant than a loan, so we're always trying to improve the loan aspects. But this has been a successful program that's had over $80 million in awards, which has helped enable over $350 million in projects move forward. But again, we just opened up the latest round. The window for applications will stay open from January 22nd to March 22nd. And the CERTA board has historically met in June to do those project awards. This particular round has $13 million in funding available for awards. The last two are the major events that we're working closely with our partners at DOT on is the opening of the Northwest Corridor lanes, which is scheduled to open this summer, tentatively in August of 2018, and then a 10-mile extension of the existing I-85 lanes, which is tentatively scheduled to open the traffic in roughly December 2018. I was going to put winter. I think the department would have preferred I put it, but every time you say winter, either, like I said, in 2018 or 2019. We're shooting for it this year. So with that, I'll
Okay, well,
take
thank you,
questions.
Director. You got a question, from Representative Rakestraw?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Northwest Corridor lanes, where is that? What is the,
So Northwest Corridor will be our newest and latest and greatest 30-mile long reversible toll road that will start at essentially I-285 and 75 in Cobb County, so right there in Marietta, and extend northward up into Cherokee County on 575. The two northern termini are Old Sixes Road and on 575 and Hickory Grove Road on 75.
so it's basically going up 75 to 575 there?
Correct.
Okay, but not 285?
Well, it starts down at 285, and essentially, if you were on I-75 headed north at 285, you would look off to your left or on the west side, and essentially what the department has done is built a parallel highway right next to it. If you've seen the construction up there, a lot of it is elevated. About 9 miles of that roadway is elevated. But to your point, it starts down by 285, travels north to where 75 and 575 split, and you have 2 lanes from 285 up to that split, and then you'll have 1 lane after that split, which will be located in the median. And that roadway will be reversible. So in the morning, all that traffic is headed in towards 285. It'll reverse around midday and be set to deal with the evening rush hour to take traffic north.
Okay, so, but 285, like, it's busy all day long, every day, both directions, right? So we really don't have a lot of hope there.
Well, we're
Do
working.
anything like that there?
So not on with the Northwest Corridor project, but as part of the Major Mobility Investment Program, we are working with the department. We're in the early pre-engineering phases on planning for the top end 285. And so under that program, the plan is to add 2 additional lanes in each direction from I-75 and 285 past 400 all the way over to Spaghetti Junction. And we're working actively with the department on that project now.
Okay, so you're just gonna expand 285 from that?
Yeah, 2 additional lanes in each direction. That won't be a reversible roadway, so 2 dedicated lanes in each direction.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Dickerson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask about the grants and the loans. Are local governments aware of how they can apply for these? Are you all sending out any information to them, or do we need to come to you?
We hope they're aware. We spend a lot of time trying to increase awareness. Every year well, first of all, we work in coordination with the Georgia Municipal Association and ACCG, or Association of City and County Governments. We provide presentations at different events and their annual meetings, and we put out materials, et cetera. So we're always trying to get the word out. Myself, members of my staff will routinely meet with individual cities and counties, and of course community improvement districts to get the word out. So we believe they're aware, but we still, quite honestly, quite candidly, would like to see even more applications from them. And I think on the loan side, honestly, a lot of municipalities either don't think that they can enter into loan agreements or don't understand what the advantage would be. The short answer to that is we believe that even the loan side is very viable. This program lends money at the same rates that the Georgia Environmental Financing Authority does for water and sewers. But put another way, it's at the exact same rates that the state can borrow at. And I would venture to say that even your most financially healthy counties can't borrow money at the rates that the state has. And even if they could, this program, albeit the amounts that are awarded are smaller, it is such a light lift compared to anyone would have to go through, be it for a SPOS, let alone a bond issuance. So we think it's viable, and we've seen certain cities such as City of Johns Creek, which took a loan to advance their resurfacing work in their subdivisions. When they looked at what was in their general budget, they could look at doing so many subdivisions per year. When they did the math and looked at if they got a loan, how many subdivisions they could repave at once, take the money that came in their budget for this line item and probably pay it off before it was time to do that resurfacing again. It made a lot of sense. So we try to work with cities and counties to certainly explain that and make sure that they're looking at it. But we also tell them they're free to ask for a grant as well.
Thank you.
All right, Colonel Hitchens.
I had two questions, and the first one, as I got thinking about it here, may not be appropriate at this time, but I was wondering if Chairman Powell's bill last year, where people who weren't paying their fines were, when they filed for their state income tax, if they were getting money back, if you've seen anything. I came to realize as I was thinking about it, I guess it went into effect July 1st, so the income tax was probably over, but, or whether or not the money came back to you and there's been any improvement in that.
I don't believe that bill actually passed
You're
at the
kidding.
last minute, no. It got out of the committees, but it didn't.
I thought it passed in the House, I don't.
I think it's on the table in the Senate.
Okay. The second question is the methodology for the cost for tolls. I'm very appreciative. I travel I-75 just like the chairman and some others, and the 50 cents. I also go up 85 some, and I was watching the other day, I went up 75 and saw the new northwest corridor, and in fact, there was a traffic accident up there, and some guy jumped over there and rode on it on the 575 part and went on up. But you know, it's 50 cents there, and for Representative Estration, who lives up in Gwinnett County, it very obviously costs a little bit more. And I wondered if that was by volume or whether or not I'm digging my own hole here and it's going to go up in the area that I travel most. Or I've had several legislators approach me, and I told them I was going to be here today to try and get some kind of answer for that.
No, it's a great question. So all of our toll roads are dynamically priced, but it's really, that's just a fancy way of saying that the tolls fluctuate. And what makes them fluctuate, it's a function of both the volume as well as the speeds of the vehicles in the corridor, but primarily in the lane. And what that means is we primarily set it based on the amount of traffic that's in that lane. One of the factors we look at is the amount of traffic in the general purpose lanes. That just tends to get congested more quickly than the facility. So it's what we call a leading indicator, but it is primarily based on what's happening in the lane. The tolls are so much higher on I-85 versus I-75 for two reasons. It's been open longer, there's a lot more peach passes in that corridor, and that particular project is only one lane in each direction. When we opened up the lanes on I-75 south, if you think about it, before that project was there, you had 3 lanes in each direction. That lane is mostly 2 lanes, so we added about 66% capacity. You went from 3 lanes to 5 lanes. That's a lot of capacity, and it should serve that area well for a while. But because you also have that extra capacity, even as the more people use it, it can just handle a lot more. And those with the Northwest Corridor should see the same benefit. Though I will go ahead and tell you the level of we call latent or pent-up demand is through the roof in Northwest Corridor. So we'll see a lot of people, a lot higher volumes, a lot more quickly.
Well, I tell you, it's the best 50 cents I ever spent when traffic is stopped out there, and you get to run through there and go through 70 miles an hour for about 12 miles and get out of. Yeah, it's a great opportunity. We really appreciate that, those of us that live south.
Thank you.
I think Representative Rakestraw has another question.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chair. So, Can you get us some numbers on how much revenue y'all are generating from these, toll and hot lanes or whatever? And then, and I'd like to see like what the average cost per day is, and then is it capped? Because I think I've been on 85 and it seems like it was like $14. It's like
There-
when it's raining, and, I mean, is it capped at a certain rate?
So, I can get you more specific numbers later, but I can give you some, ballpark. So, starting with your last question first, yes, right now, the CERTA board can set the toll range, and that one is set as low as 1 cent a mile and up to a total trip charge of $13.95. So no one has ever paid more than $13.95. But to pay that, the toll has to be at that highest amount, and you would have to travel the full 16 miles. So your other question is, what are people paying in average? I'd have to get the numbers, but the average toll during peak hours, during rush hours, on 95, I believe is around $4. And it tells you a couple of things. Most people aren't doing the 16-mile trip. In fact, about 10% of the traffic goes end to end. So it's a function of what the toll rate is and how far someone travels in it. A lot of people use it either to get past Jimmy Carter, just north of 285, and then they pop out. They've gotten through what they consider the worst piece. And so that's why it varies so much.
So, I mean, but it could, if you've got someone that lives like, you know, North Gwinnett and they work in Atlanta and it's a rainy week and roads are bad, I mean, it could be like round trip. It could cost them like $26 a day to get back and forth to work, right?
It could if they use it every day. The last time we pulled the statistics, about 30% of the users used it 4 to 5 times per week. So 70% use it 3 times or less per week. Or put another way, a lot of people use it when they're running late, or when they're running late, or when they think it's worth their money. But obviously, the overwhelming majority do not use it every single day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you again, Director. I'll just mention, I think we've got the best budget analyst in the whole House Research and Budget Office in Abby Day, and Abby's already sent me something. So if you would forward that to the committee, that's got the information that was on your website, Georgia Tolls,
Yes.
and it's also got the whole list of the last round of awards from the GTIB. And I just glanced through it, and I can tell you I appreciate it, because I remember a couple of years ago when we looked at it, and it was pretty. Everything except one project was in one part of the state, so it looks a lot more evenly. And so you're getting interest from around the state now.
We're getting interest around the state. We're going out and trying to make sure we talk to people who just weren't focused. When this program originally started, the community improvement districts, even though it's a statewide law, obviously they make their money off of the property value, so it tends to concentrate in the metro areas.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, we've really been trying to get the word out to cities and counties, and we've gone out of our way. Internally, the goal I set was design an application where people don't have to hire a consultant to help them fill it out. And the process, I think, if you talk to anybody, any city, I think they would agree. Now, a lot of them still use a consultant, but I think they agree they could easily put this together. And I would also just mention the evaluation committee is made up of people from GFA, because there could be a financing component, GDOT, CERTA, Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. But we also have reps on there, separate reps from the Municipal Association as well as ACCG. And I point that out, one, to say we really want that type of broad, diverse representation. But the other reason I point it out is the exception of, you know, whoever GDOT may put on it, and by the way, it's historically has been the planning director. This is not staff with a bunch of engineers, so the project needs, is being reviewed by people who are just looking to see, wow, does this make sense? You don't have to know all the engineering that goes behind a roundabout. You need to understand that there's been a lot of accidents here, and this community says this can really help. And that's one of the things we're very proud of with the program. This is not a technical exercise to see who has the best engineering consultant. This is what is the real world practical implication if this project is built.
All right, well, thank you. I guess this is going to finish things up, and I guess we can just all pray that hopefully, as we've worked here all day and don't know what's going on outside of this building, maybe the federal government's going to show up for work tomorrow. So, thank you again, Director and committee.
Thank you.